Some might say that 2015 was the best era for Ninjago, and some might say that right now, Dragons Rising is the best. But they would all be wrong, because the Oni trilogy was easily the best era of Ninjago, and no one can change my mind. So, as I'm sure you all know, the Oni trilogy includes Season 8 Sons of Garmadon, Season 9 Hunted, and Season 10 March of the Oni. And I absolutely love all of these seasons, as especially the first two are some of the best Ninjago has ever produced. And I just have to mention that this is one of the only times that Ninjago has had an overarching story for multiple seasons and it somehow went well, which usually isn't something that you can say about Ninjago. But anyway, let's just jump straight into SOG. And this season was great and easily considered to be the best Ninjago season ever released, which is saying something because at this time, Ninjago wasn't in a great position because of the redesigns, and the last 3 releases of Ninjago weren't great, but somehow this season managed to pull off the impossible, and you could definitely say that the animation helped this season because it just looks so incredible. In fact, the rest of the Oni trilogy looks so good as well, and they definitely show this off in the first scene of Sons of Garmadon, which is just a really fun and just a really good setup in general. And also the plot of this season was just great as well, and also just a really good excuse to bring back Lord Garmadon, even though I don't think he was the best in this trilogy. That might be a little bit of a hot take, but I'll talk about that later on. So anyway, back to the story side of things, I also really love the idea of the Oni masks, because they can grant powers to the user, but I also kind of just wish that those powers were a little bit better. The Mask of Vengeance gives the user 4 arms, and as Jay says, that is nothing new at all, but it does have me thinking, what if Lord Garmadon put on the mask? Would he still have 4 arms? Would the mask give him an extra 2 arms, making him have 6? Or does it double the amount of arms that he has, so Garmadon would then have 8 arms? That would be crazy. Anyway, next is the Mask of Deception, which is my least favorite of the bunch. The concept is decent, but sadly it never lived up to the concept. The mask didn't really do much deceiving. Instead, it was kind of the Mask of Levitation, because I can only remember Kilo using it to lift off rocks off the ground. But finally, my favorite of the bunch would be the Mask of Hatred, and the episode where they got the mask was just so great, but I'll talk about that later on. So, this mask was used by both Harumi and Ultraviolet, and it pretty much gives you invincibility, and it would have been really cool to see someone like Lloyd wear the mask, and they had the perfect opportunity to do so, and they even mentioned that in the show itself, but ultimately I am glad that he didn't, because if he wore it, then it could have made things a lot more complicated, and I liked the way that Lloyd defeated Garmadon with the art of the Silent Fist in the Hunted finale. But going back to SOG, how could we not talk about the Quiet One storyline? So I thought that it was actually really good, even though most people probably already knew that Harumi was the Quiet One because of the set promotion videos. But in the show, I think that I did do a decent job of keeping it a mystery, while also dropping little clues across the season that you can pick up on once you rewatch it. For example, at the start, she says the Oni masks should never be reunited, which signals that she knows the power of the masks, which you could say that maybe the king and queen or Hutchins told her, or she just knew because she was living with one. But why did the royal family even have one in the first place? It doesn't really make much sense to me. Anyway, in the second episode when Lloyd and Harumi are on their so-called date, they see the SOG bullying some kids and she says they only take orders. It's the person that gives them that scares me. And then later on in the episode, Lloyd and Harumi are on a bike chase, and Harumi dropped the Mask of Deception, and watching it back, it is pretty obvious that she dropped it so Ultraviolet could get the mask. And then when Zane is racing with the Sons of Garmadon, Ultraviolet gets a call that Zane is there, so then Kilo and the gang go after Zane so he can't finish the race, which I find so weird till this day. Like, why are you trying to stop Zane from being able to ride and slowing him down? I'm pretty sure this ride was meant to be to see if Zane would be recruited or not. And I mean, Kilo, instead of doing what you did, why didn't you try and hurt Zane or something like that? But anyway, there were a few more hints, like when Harumi saved Lloyd from the Strangleweed and she said she just got lucky. Harumi, there's no way that you can say what you just did was luck. And the final hint that I noticed, at least, was that she said the greatest enemy was the one that got away, which is obviously her, by the way. But something I didn't like too much was how we, the audience, was told Harumi was the quiet one. The ninja just found out that the quiet one was found on the ship and then narrowed it down that it had to be Harumi. And then, until Lloyd found out she was the quiet one, she was just messing everything up in the Oni temple. And speaking about Lloyd finding out, he found it out when Harumi mentioned that only Lloyd could grab the mask because he is part Oni. And then Lloyd goes, hold on, when did I tell you I was part Oni? Wait, you're the quiet one? And I don't know how to feel about this. No doubt Lloyd is smart and a very good ninja, but I feel like what Harumi said also could have just gone over Lloyd's head, because he would have just been so focused on getting the Oni mask. And the final thing I wanted to say about this particular season was that I love how it ends with the ninja and Wu on the bounty about to get squished to death by the Oni Titan as Harumi forces Lloyd to watch. But luckily the ninja have the Traveler's Tea, which takes them to the first realm, the realm of Oni and Dragon. So that's pretty much all I had to say on SOG. I do want to talk more about the characters in this season, but I think it would just be best to do that once we talk about the other seasons, because most of the characters have an arc that goes throughout the entire trilogy. So now, let's move on to Hunted, which takes place 1 week after Sons of Garmadon. So, if you didn't know, Hunted is my most favourite Ninjago season, and I think it is because of the fact that there are 2 different stories going on at the same time. Lloyd and Nia in Ninjago trying to stop Garmadon, and of course, the OG 4 Ninja and Wu trying to escape the First Realm and get back to Ninjago, which is my favourite of the 2 stories. So, why don't we start off there? So, firstly, I really like how this part of the season really feels like the early days of Ninjago. I'm talking all the way back to season 1 and 2. And this is because we get to see the 4 OG ninja working together without Lloyd or Nia. Don't get me wrong, I do like those 2 characters, and I do prefer it when all 6 of them are together, but it does just feel special when we get to see these 4 together. But anyway, let's talk about the actual season. So obviously, it picks up right from when SOG finished, with them being stuck in the First Realm, and they try to get a message to Ninjago, but it fails, and they instead get captured by the Dragon Hunters, and Wu is also a little grown up now. And I know a lot of people aren't huge fans of the Hunters, but I think they're alright. So after they get captured, they fight a dragon and work for the Hunters for a little bit before they eventually escape from them, which leads to them being hunted by the Dragon Hunters. And this is where a brand new side character comes in, Faith. And I know I said that I would save talking about characters until the end, but since she is basically only in this season and does nothing significant in March of the Oni, I'll just talk a bit about her here. So what do I think of Faith? Well, I think she is an okay side character. She isn't really anything special, and I can find her to be a bit boring at times, like the rest of the Hunters. Regardless, I do find her backstory to be kind of good because it just shows how manipulating the Iron Baron is, and more on him a bit later. Also, I do like her mini character arc, where at the start, when she finds a ninja, she joins them because she wants to leave and go to Ninjago with them, and then towards the end, she becomes friends with Jetjack, and then she ultimately decides to stay in her realm because she wants to help fix it. So going back to the plot, the ninja Master Wu, who is now a teenager, and Faith want to find the dragon armor so they can control Firstborn and go back to Ninjago. And of course, throughout all of this, the hunters are chasing them. And I've got to say that there is a chase scene that takes up like half an episode that I absolutely love. It is just so action-packed, so much is going on, I love it. Anyway, after that chase, the hunters trap Faith in the sand, and so the ninjas go to save her and then get ambushed. I mean, they could easily just binge it to their asses, but then the plot wouldn't move forward, so instead they all get captured, and then Wu breaks free and agrees to help Baron get the dragon armor in exchange for freeing the ninjas. And there is just something that happens on this journey that I just hate. So, as they are on their way, they have to cross this very unstable bridge, and Iron Baron, being the absolute pain he is, he falls, and he could have died, but Master Wu saved him. But why? Why not just let him fall? I obviously understand that I couldn't just let Baron fall to his death, and he could say that Wu is just such a good guy that he believes even someone like the Baron deserves a second chance. But then, why did Wu just seem to be absolutely fine, maybe even slightly happy when Firstborn burned him? Like, I know Wu really couldn't have done much to help him, but still, I just wish that that Baron falling scene was just removed from the show. Anyway, Wu gets the armor and the ninja get a dragon each and go back to Ninjago. And I just wanted to say that I love this scene. I don't know what it is about it that I like, but I just like it. So now let's talk about the other part of the season, the Resistance versus SOG in Ninjago City. So at the start, Lloyd is sad because he has lost his powers and he feels useless. And then the SOG ambush them, and he, Nia, Pixel, Misako, and Deref almost get captured, but the Elemental Masters save them. And it is just so good to see them back after, at this point, it had been 3 years since we saw them last. So, they then go to their base, which is a garbage depot, where they meet Mistake, who tells them that the ninja are still alive, which I don't like. It would have been interesting to see how the story would have played out differently if they all thought that the ninja were dead, instead of just knowing that they were alive from the very start. So after a little while, Lloyd and a couple members of the Resistance infiltrate Borg Tower, which is now being run by the Sons of Garmadon, to send a message to the citizens of Ninjago. And during this section, Garmadon senses Lloyd, so they need to hide, and then Skylar combines Pale Man's and Shade's powers together to hide them. And I do like the idea of combining elemental powers, and it is a shame we haven't seen it again since, but I think that in this scenario, she could have just used either element. There was no need to use both, but feel free to let me know in the comments if I'm missing something here. But while we are on the topic of Skylar, I just wanted to briefly mention that she has been obviously nerfed this season. In Season 4, she could use any power she wanted whenever she wanted, as long as she touched the person with the power. But now, when she touches someone, she now has like a time limit to use the power until she is just unable to. And I think that Crystallized is a perfect example of this, even though it has nothing to do with Hunted. So I do understand why she was nerfed. She simply would have just been way too powerful, but I don't like the inconsistency. Side rant finally complete. So yeah, they send a message, the Resistance never quits, and they are happy until the SOG send a message of their own right back to them, that being an ambush, where everyone is captured except Lloyd, Nia, Skylar, and Deref, who escape in the battle wagon. So now they are well and truly on the run and being hunted, and the SOG find them again, but they instead capture Rumi, thanks to the help of Mistake, who we now know is an Oni. So now that she is captured, they have a plan. Get Skylar close enough to Garmadon so she can absorb his powers, which does work with just a minor setback of Mistake getting killed by Garmadon. So now that Skylar has Garmadon's power, she can control the Oni Titan. So then they both fight over who gets to control it until they both lose control and it crashes into a building which collapses, which of course has Harumi on it, and you know what happens next. She dies, but then the Overlord revives her straight away. How did she even get into that building in the first place? She was on top of Borg Tower when this all started, and then for some reason she went into this building and went all the way to the top of it. It was definitely a pretty stupid decision on her end. Anyway, they then run away and meet Ultraviolet and then defeat her. Then the ninja from the Oni and Dragon Roll come through and meet with the others. Then we get to see Kai, Jay, Zane and Cole take down the Oni Titan, and Lloyd and Wu fight Garmadon. And at the end of their fight, Garmadon says they're coming. And who is coming? Well, it is the Oni, which perfectly brings us to the final season for today, March of the Oni. So this season was obviously a short one, only 4 episodes. And at this point, every season was getting like 10 episodes each. And if I had to guess, it is because they wanted Masters of Spinjitzu to end with 100 episodes, even though the last episode endings was episode 98. But if you added on the pilot episodes, you would get to 100. But I think that they should have tried to give the season 6 episodes so it could actually be the 100th episode. I guess that would also help out this season in other ways, because I think that mostly everyone feels like that this season was just a little bit rushed. And if it wasn't rushed, then some other problems that people have with the season could be fixed. Like, for example, almost everyone can agree that in the end, the Oni didn't feel as dangerous and destructive as we were told they would be, and the ninja only really had one real encounter, one fight with the Oni, which was in the finale. So they obviously had to win that one, and that fight was even lackluster as well. This season also had not one but 2 fake out deaths. Obviously the first one was Cole's famous fall from the Destiny's bounty, which they tried to make us believe that he died so hard by giving us this scene with no sound, just some music in the background, and then have Kai comforting Nia about it. But the worst part isn't how hard they tried to make us believe he was dead. Even though there would have been only 2 people in like the whole universe, he might have actually believed it. But at the very end of the same episode that he fell, they show us that Cole is indeed alive. The other fake out death was Lloyd's, which wasn't nearly as bad because I didn't really try to make anyone believe that he was actually dead. But instead, they gave us an actually cool scene with Lloyd talking to his grandpa, the first Spinjitzu master, who we have never really seen much of. So overall, this season had its problems, but it was still a fun experience in the end, and it was a pretty good spot to end off the Oni trilogy. Okay, so now that you have my thoughts on the actual seasons themselves, let's talk about the characters. And let's start off with Garmadon, because I mentioned him at the start, where I said that I didn't really like him in this trilogy. So obviously, I have a lot of explaining to do, so there's no point holding it off. So in my opinion, Garmadon just didn't feel like Garmadon. His original charm that he had in the original seasons was gone, and maybe the movie version just set up too high of an expectation for me. And I know that was kind of the whole thing with Garmadon, that he wasn't supposed to be the same Garmadon as we knew, but instead a Garmadon that was pure evil. And I've got to say that I did do quite a good job at this, especially with the Lloyd and Garmadon fight. That really showed us that this Garmadon was different because he had zero remorse for hurting his own son. Also, I just wanted to briefly mention his new powers. In the first 2 Ninjago seasons, we never saw anything resembling these powers, and I just find it really weird how he now has them. You could say that Garmadon had these powers all along, but because he still had his good human side in the original version, he couldn't access these powers. But I don't like that reason. Regardless, his powers are pretty cool and do more good for the show than harm. So back on track. We have talked about Garmadon in Season 8, but what about the start of Season 9? And honestly, we don't get to see too much in this season until the end. When we saw him at the start, he was ruthless. I mean, did you see what he did to Mr. E? But in the later parts of the season, where he got closer to Harumi, he started to feel more like himself. He actually cared, and we can see this when Harumi dies. He is distraught and says this.
You want this city, Lloyd? Then you can have it in ruins!
Yeah, he is pretty angry. And he practically stays this way until he was defeated, where he kind of just becomes a bit calmer, you could say. So up to this point, I don't really have a problem with Garmadon. Sure, I don't like everything about him and I do miss his earlier version, but this is still just fine. But it is really in March of the Oni where he starts to kind of feel weird to me. So at the very start of the season, Lloyd visits Garmadon in his cell, and right off the bat, you can tell he has changed. You could say that he's been like his older self by the way he's sort of joking around, but you could say the way this was done isn't as good as the older version, and not to mention that it is just kind of odd from Garmadon to go from very serious and angry at wanting to destroy Ninjago, and now he is laid back, especially because there is no reason for this. But in the rest of the season, he does get better. So now it is time to talk about the one who resurrected him, Harumi. So we have already talked about her being the quiet one, so there's no need to mention that again. So let's start on her backstory. It is a pretty good scene where we get to see how Harumi's parents died and that it actually relates to a past Ninjago season. And we also get to see how she got her name, the Quiet One. But what I don't like about it is that she hates the ninja, especially Lloyd, because they weren't able to stop the Great Devourer, which I know it has been said 1,000 times before, but it makes no sense. Shouldn't Prideful be the one that she hates? Anyway, there is just one more thing I wanted to mention. We can assume that in Season 8, Lloyd and Harumi were around the same age, but we know that Harumi was only a kid during the Great Devourer, no older than Lloyd would have been during that time, and that would make sense until you remember that in Season 2, Lloyd took a tea that aged him up at least 5 years or so it doesn't make sense, does it? Well, moving away from her backstory, let's move on to her and Lloyd, since that is quite a huge part of her character. So as we know, the whole Lloyd and Harumi thing was a lie. Lloyd liked Harumi, and Harumi was only using Lloyd to help her. I liked the scenes they had together because it had a great dynamic, and when Harumi reveals herself to Lloyd, you can see just how hurt he is, and that Harumi starts trying to manipulate him, showing that she never even cared for him. And then during the end of Sons of Garmadon, we see how much Harumi idolizes Garmadon, and that at the start of Hunted, we see her starting to think that she has made a mistake by resurrecting him, like when Garmadon just rips apart Mr. E in front of her eyes. But regardless, she still helps Garmadon and even offered to be his daughter. But it wasn't up until the end of Hunted, or at least her end of the season, when she really started to second guess herself, especially during that Oni Titan battle. And I do like how her story ends full circle with her saving a family from the same fate that she had when she ultimately gets crushed by the building. It showed that Harumi wasn't as evil as we thought she was, and it was a small step, a very tiny step, but it was a step to redemption. So let's stick with the villains and talk about the Iron Baron. So I have already mentioned how a lot of fans didn't find him interesting, but I didn't mind him, and that is mostly true, but I could potentially just be blinded by how much I liked the season, and especially the Oni and Dragon part, to see how bad of a villain he could be. So anyway, we don't really get to see the Baron too much early on. Basically all he did was hunt down dragons, but halfway through the season, we learned that he had lied to his hunters about the Oni land because there were no Onis there. So then, when the rest of the hunters learn this as well, they all hate him and they all celebrate when he was burnt to death thanks to Firstborn. So we have now talked about all the villains except one, the Omega Oni. And there isn't too much to say on him because we all know he had a combined of 5 minutes of screen time in the entire season, which is very disappointing because I think he had the potential to be one of the best Ninjago villains, but sadly, he kind of goes down as one of the worst for many. So now, it is time to talk about the heroes, and sadly there are quite a few of them where there's just not enough to talk about to give them a whole section. Kai, Jay, Zane and Nia aren't completely irrelevant in these 3 seasons, but they really didn't do stuff in the grand scheme of things. But with Cole and especially Lloyd and Wu, there's quite a decent amount that I want to talk about. So let's start with Cole. At the start of Season 8, he says that his body is a temple and he now doesn't allow himself to eat cake. And then in the middle of Season 9, he misses cake so much that he says that cake is the best thing in the world. This shows that throughout his journey, he learns that a few sweets every now and then isn't a bad thing. What a great character arc. Obviously, I'm joking, and I honestly don't even know why I started saying that in the first place. So, at the start of Sons of Garmadon, Cole is basically the only ninja that is still determined to find Master Wu. So it is fitting that when he was locked up by the Sons of Garmadon, he finds a baby that ends up being revealed to be Master Wu. But first, let's mention how he ended up being in the Sons of Garmadon's custody in the first place. So he and Zane disguised themselves as Snake Jaguar and Rocky Danger Buff, and the only way that Zane could see they could talk to Mr. E and Ultraviolet was if Cole sang, which I thought was pretty stupid, but I did like that we got to see Cole going back to his roots. By going back to Cole being locked up at the Sons of Garmadon's base, we also learned that Cole likes to talk to himself, which you get to see multiple times throughout the season, and also when he is in the darkness in March of the Oni. But after season 10, we don't get to see too much of it until one episode in Master of the Mountain. So now going back to Cole and Wu. In this trilogy, especially 8 and 9, we really get to see these two interacting together a lot. In fact, they probably spend more time together in these two seasons alone than in the rest of the series. It's also cool to see just how much Cole cares about him, especially when he jumps off the building, risking his life just to save Wu. And then in Hunted, he and little Wu have a great dynamic, and when he becomes Teen Wu and they start looking for the dragon armor and lies to Faith that he knows where it is, Cole starts to tell him off in a way, but how can we talk about Cole without mentioning the Fall? All in all, it wasn't a bad scene whatsoever, and I mentioned this before, but it was far from convincing, but it did lead to a cool scene where we got to see Cole in the darkness trying to fix his keys for the Earth Driller. So that's pretty much it for Cole. So now it is time for Master Wu. So I mentioned his relationship with Cole like a minute ago, so there is no need to mention it again. So we all know that in Season 7, Wu got hit with the reversal blade to heal his rapid aging caused by the time punch. And as we see in the Golden Hour short, Wu starts to get younger and younger until he is a toddler. And based off how fast he was going between ages in the short, we can assume that not long after he went all the way back to a baby, which we see him as at the start of Sons of Garmadon. And we know that it was about a year between Hands of Time and Sons of Garmadon, which means that Wu stayed a baby for a year. And then once Cole found him, it took him only a couple of weeks to get back to his regular super old self, which doesn't make much sense to me, but it isn't really a big deal. Another thing that just doesn't make much sense is how did the Sons of Garmadon even find Wu? Were they looking for him? Did they just stumble upon him? And if so, how did they know it was Wu? I mean, he could have been wearing that straw hat, but surely that would have fallen off. And how would the Sons of Garmadon even know that Wu got hit by the reversal blade and turned into a baby? And my final question is, where did Wu end up after he escaped the Iron of Doom? There are just so many questions I have and absolutely zero answers. But moving on, I do enjoy watching him grow up and relearn his lessons from his students throughout Hunted. And is it weird to say that I think I actually prefer him as a kid / teenager more than when he's so anyway? It is safe to say that I enjoyed Wu in 8 and 9, but it is sad to see that in 10, he is once again in that master role where he doesn't do much for the actual story. Finally, we have Lloyd, and oh boy, is there a lot to say. So, in Sons of Garmadon, Lloyd learns that he is half Oni and half dragon, but that doesn't really mean much until March of the Oni anyway. But also in Season 8, we get to see Lloyd deal with two different things, Garmadon coming back and Harumi. So when Lloyd first heard that the Sons of Garmadon wanted to bring back Lord Garmadon, he was obviously really upset, which makes sense, especially because they only wanted to bring back his evil side. So I've got to say that is quite a good motivator for Lloyd this season because it is personal to him. And then when Garmadon actually did return, Lloyd was angry and his mind was only on one thing, stopping him by himself, because he didn't want anyone to get hurt. And then when he is fighting Garmadon, you can see his anger. And then when he gets thrown through a wall or two, he feels useless. And also because of his fight with his dad, he lost his elemental powers. And at the start of Season 9, he feels useless again. But then when he starts to lead the resistance and they get a win against the Sons of Garmadon, when they infiltrated Borg Tower, Lloyd's confidence grew. And then he was ready to face Garmadon again. But not alone this time. And now during March of the Oni, we kind of get to see Lloyd and Garmadon's relationship start up again. Yeah, it starts off with a rocky start with Garmadon trying to kill everyone on the bounty, but when it is just them two in the darkness, you can see that Garmadon is really starting to change by the way he is helping Lloyd, and he even waited until Lloyd was awake in the finale until he left the monastery. Now it is time for the big topic though, Harumi and Lloyd. So when I was yapping about Harumi, I already mentioned how it started and stuff, so now I really want to focus on its effect on Lloyd. As soon as he found out that she was the quiet one, he was visibly hurt, but he didn't really have much time to think about it until they stopped the ceremony. And here we see that after Harumi, Lloyd says that he will never be as trusting to anyone ever again, which would be quite a good direction to see Lloyd go in, but it never really led anywhere, because the next people that he could decide whether he was going to trust or not were immediately trusted. Now you could just say that it was because it was the Elemental Masters, but he was also pretty trusting of Akita, Akino, Grace the Seven, and Benfemar. But don't get me wrong, I don't want to see Lloyd completely shut off to everyone else, but it would have just been cool to see Harumi's effect on Lloyd a bit more. So that just about wraps up the entire Oni trilogy review. If you want to see another review, which thankfully isn't as long, you can click here. See you later, be ninja.